And we're live. Hello and welcome everyone to today's LinkedIn Live episode here with Object First, as well as a few very special guests. My name is Matt Price. I'll be your host today. I'm the manager of all things enablement here at Object First. And before we get into intros, we certainly want to keep this as interactive as possible. So for those of you who have joined us live, please make sure to locate the questions box there on LinkedIn. Any questions that you have, comments, things that you'd like to discuss, please drop those in as we go through today's session, and we'll try to answer any of your questions, potentially even show you things live when we get in the lab. But with that said, you see a couple other folks on the call, so let me pitch it over to one of my colleagues, Mr. Ryan Post. Ryan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So my name is Ryan Post. I am the senior sales engineer here at Object First. So anything sales related from the technical perspective, I would be a go-to person to help garner any conversation you would like to have. And with that, I'll pass it over to our other guest, Brent.
Thanks, Ryan. Brent Earls, CTO at 𝗡𝗔𝗓𝗓𝗡. We're a VAR/consulting company / managed services based in the Midwest. We've been doing all this for about 21 years, so quite a bit of experience in the field.
Awesome. So Brent, first off, thank you very much for your time, and willingness to jump on this episode with us. And it's my understanding you guys have been a Veeam partner for just a few years, right?
Yeah, we actually, they came around when they were on version 1 of backup and recovery, trying to get us as a partner. And there wasn't even a button to stop a job at that point. We were like, guys, nah, come back later. And they came back at version 2 and delivered on everything they promised. And we've sold since version 2, which I think was 2007 or 8.
That's awesome. And we're also ecstatic to have you guys as a partner with Object First. So the episode of today's session is better data management. And the past couple of episodes we've done have focused on immutability and ways that you can recover and all the powerful capabilities when you look at Veeam plus Object First together. But when we look at today's session around better data management, certainly with you being brought in as a special guest, so your experience, we know that there are immutable options in the cloud. Veeam has been leveraging that for several versions now, whether it's Amazon S3 or Azure or any of these other, cloud-based targets. But what types of challenges have you seen by customers not having immutable backups on-prem?
Yeah, we've been through this several times at this point. Originally we were just focusing on getting storage and having backups and being able to go back in time. And then with the malware trends that started, everybody started being like, oh crap, we need something that's safe. So some people started doing rotating hard drives, some people started doing tape, other people started sending stuff to the cloud for immutable storage there. And all of these kind of experience some of the similar issues. So for example, with the cloud-based storage, bandwidth is the biggest thing. People might only need 100 meg for their users to do their job, but then they start trying to upload 30 terabytes of backups over 100 meg, and it takes days, sometimes weeks. And during that time, it keeps getting interrupted by the new backups and takes longer. And then even when they get caught up, when they try to work on backups, maybe they need to run some active fulls to get stuff that going right again to fix some CBT problems, then all that has to upload again. And so backups can sometimes get 2 or 3 days delayed from reality. And so that means they don't have an immutable copy of their most recent backups, which 95+% of our restores always come from the most recent backup. And then they try to pull it down. And hey, it might take another 2 weeks. And those big cloud providers, a lot of them don't want to send you a hard drive to get your backups back faster than that, unless there's significant amounts of data, Snowball and all that stuff. You have to have very large amounts of data that you're trying to transfer before they'll even do that. So when these people have disasters, when they get ransomware, when they get a malicious actor in there, they might be down for days waiting to get their backups back to start recovery.
Yeah, and Brent, I know when you and I were chatting, last week or so, one of the other potential challenges that a lot of people don't think about with these offsite, object storage solutions is what about the potential of a misconfiguration on the Veeam end that might lead to duplicate data sets or data going up that they didn't intend, to go up. Not only do you have the bandwidth limitation, but there's also that potential of a, Veeam error or misconfiguration on the Veeam end.
Yeah, with the way a lot of that's currently set up, at least within Veeam, people have to essentially ship everything. And when they're shipping everything, they do multiple backups. All that has to get up there. And the cloud providers all charge you based on at least capacity. So if people are running multiple fulls to try to fix a CBT problem, whatever problem they're having, then all of a sudden that backup that time might grow by 20%, sometimes up to 100%, depending on what server. It's always the biggest server. That's the problem that they're working on. And then at that point, with Wasabi, you don't pay for ingress, egress, API calls, or anything, but they charge you for 3 months based on your capacity. So when you spike up like that, you have to pay that amount for at least 3 months till that rolls off. So you're stuck up at that higher level. With AWS, with Azure, with several of the other cloud providers who offer solutions, you're then getting not only the capacity, but you're also getting all the API calls and egress bandwidth if you start pulling stuff down. And all that stuff adds up really, really quickly to where your bill for a month might double, triple if you're really having some issues with backups and rerunning things and trying to work through all of that. So it makes a very unpredictable cost model.
Yeah, and when you look at simplicity, so one of the things that we really strive for here at Object First is to keep things simple. When we talk about immutability out of the box, that's literally enabled by default when you create your first bucket. So we try to keep everything simple. But the reality is simplicity can mean different things to different people. So with that said, in your experience, how do you envision Object First simplistic approach to ransomware proof data protection? How do you see that resonating with your customers?
It's a really big thing right now for people. Most people in that small to mid market don't even truly understand what object is. You're still having to have the explanation to it. So when you're talking about these products and you're talking buckets and you're talking setting these things up in these cloud providers and making your storage accounts and making your resource groups and making all this stuff, they're like, I just what do I have to do? I just need to get this going. I need to make it work. And with Object First, you literally just click 2 buttons and it's there and it's ready to go. There's a lot of other solutions people have been looking for or looking at. One of those is Veeam hardened repo. If you've gone through any of the Veeam webinars, the Veeam training for VMCE, VMCA, any of that stuff, they talk a lot about the Veeam hardened repo, and it is a great solution that works really well, but it's not as simple as the training labs and whatever is. But when you set that up, essentially you're building a Linux server, presumably on physical storage. So you need to know how to set Linux up. You need to know how to set up drivers. If it's accessing iSCSI storage, how to set up iSCSI, set up MPIO, get all that stuff configured, set up in a secure method. Then you actually have to set everything up for Veeam, which is the easiest part of it. The Veeam part of it is super easy. But once that part's set up, then you have to disable all access to the server, basically. You turn off SSH. So now it's a headless box running in the corner that Veeam can talk to with no SSH on it. And if you keep it truly locked down, it becomes very hard to actually monitor it and manage it because you don't want to open anything up inherently. So since it's a general purpose Linux server that you've made single purpose, it doesn't have all the stuff set up by default for that monitoring and management without poking holes in it. And unless you're somebody who really knows Linux and you're good at Linux, which, to be fair, in the SMB market, that's not normally a really big skill set with a lot of people. Most people are Windows admins in that job size, it becomes very difficult to actually manage and maintain that repo over time and keep it secure. Like knowing, oh, hey, they had another white hat conference and there's another SSH vulnerability. You need to patch it. Oh crap, we'll have to turn SSH on to be able to get to the box to be able to patch it. How do I do this securely and safely? All of those things can definitely make it be more of a administrative overhead. And not to discredit anything Veeam's done or says, their part of it is really simple. It's everything around their part that makes it problematic and causes that extra work. And with Object First, it's a purpose-built appliance. We don't have to worry about any of the back-end OS. We don't have to worry about the software. It's one click to upgrade it, get all the latest security patches we need, get all the updates to the software. I don't have to worry about SSH. I go to an HTML5 UI. None of that other stuff is open there for me to have to worry about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that we look at when you talk about the primary repository of Veeam is performance. And Brent, as well as anybody, you've been selling Veeam for quite some time. They continue to innovate ways to leverage data. When you look at the data management layer and the storage layer, those are separate with Veeam. They remain software defined. So they continue to build ways to innovate on, once you have a backup, what can you do with it? Is it on-demand sandbox? Is it data labs? Is it secure restore? All kinds of different ways. And, I don't know if Rick Vanover is still on this phone on the stream, but I saw him earlier, and I actually stole one of the graphics from his blog post. And Veeam is almost up to 100 different ways that they can leverage data, once you have things backed up. And I believe they will be once V12 drops. So with that said, when you look at your customer base and, what you've seen in the space, why do you feel like performance is paramount for your Veeam customers when you make a recommendation on that initial primary backup target?
So a lot of this goes back, we've said this for almost 15 years now. The backup doesn't matter. It's the recovery that matters.
Yep.
Before Veeam, we were a backup exec shop because everybody was a backup exec shop. It could run backups all day long, every day. You start restoring those, and it was a nightmare. It might take hours just to get the restore going by the time you index things and got everything ready to go. And then Veeam came along, and restores could happen immediately. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't we're waiting on the software. It was the software's ready to go. You're waiting on the storage. So early on, people just had like a couple drives in a RAID 1 because all they were worried about were having the backups. But as data has grown larger and larger and larger, being able to get that back quickly is paramount now. And leveraging something like Veeam Instant On. I was in a car driving to Tennessee when version, I think that was 5, came out with that feature, and they were doing the presentation. I was like, this is black magic. I don't know how in the world they're doing that. And then we started trying it at some customers, and it was so slow, it was basically unusable because people hadn't built storage to be fast for backups. They just needed the data. But now all of a sudden, I'm running VMs from that backup. So I'm actually pulling prod data off my backups. They need to run at least with some semblance of prod speed. And Veeam did a lot of stuff to make that easier with their instant recovery cache that you can put different places and things. But when it really comes down to it, that first read has to come off your backup storage. So you need that to be fast and responsive with low latency. Latency usually ends up being the biggest thing. People, again, the server you're always worried about is the biggest. It's the 8 terabyte file server. It's the 2 terabyte ERP SQL database that destroys the storage. So you really need something that can restore quickly and low latency to actually get that up. So you instant on it, and then you've got to actually be able to boot it. And so that's where having fast storage on the back end really matters. And if you're trying to pull that off a cloud, well, Godspeed to you, because that latency, you're immediately at, even no matter how good your connection is, you're already at tens of milliseconds of latency to start with. And so getting that on-prem where I can really pull that local at that 1 millisecond, less than 1 millisecond latency off storage that's fast, that maybe has, I don't know, NVMe in front of it for extra performance, so that I can get that up and going quickly and get it responsive is just super important. And that goes with everything built off the instant recovery stuff. Sure, backup. Automatic testing of backups is huge. Not enough people leverage it, and in part it's because, well, it brings our backup storage to a crawl when we try to do it because we don't have enough speed. So then stuff starts timing out and we have problems. So getting fast backup storage just makes all these different things function so much better. I mean, even just going down to the point of browsing for the CEO's PowerPoint that he accidentally deleted 5 minutes before his board presentation. Fast storage makes it quicker and easier to get that back and actually get it to people who need it when they need it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember when Ryan and I were over on the Veeam side doing demos, and to your point, Brent, when it first came out, instant VM recovery way back when, we had people trying to do it off deduplication boxes, and it's just not going to work. They see it nice and flashy in the lab because we designed it with decent storage. And when I look at the whole simplicity message that we have, immutability out of the box, it's simple to deploy, but it's also highly performant. And that's the part that you can't sacrifice, because sure, there are ways to have on-premises immutable backups, but they're slow. So it's, when you look at a Veeam solution, Veeam is the leader, in data management. We all know that, Gartner knows that, everybody knows that. But if you put slow storage as your primary backup landing zone, you're basically sacrificing, all that innovation. So performance is absolutely critical. Couldn't agree more. Sure, backup is certainly underutilized. Every time I get an opportunity to pitch it, I do, because it is so critical. I know the whole 3-2-1-1-0 rule is out there, which, I wholeheartedly agree with, because you look at the 3-2-1, take the extra 1 and 0 out. What happens if you don't verify these backups first for, recoverability? You may go through all the bandwidth requirements, all the hassle to ship them all over the world. But if they're not recoverable from the beginning, what are you doing, right? You're just wasting all that effort. So performance to be able to do that in a timely fashion is, really critical. So with that said, I know it's been a lot of us talking. Why don't we pass the baton over to Mr. Ryan and let him showcase some of this in the lab?
Yeah, let's jump on in. So we should be able to see the screen up here. And if you've seen some of the demos we've had online before, you've probably seen the way of setting up a new cluster. And that's quite simple. It's about 5 steps. But what about you already have Object First in place with a single node? You realize you need to expand. How easy and simple is it to actually expand and add another node to that cluster? Well, it's really as simple as going into the Join Cluster option within the TUI that we have here. In this TUI, you are presented with, once you log in via IPMI or keyboard and monitor, to actually set up the particular node. But if we go to Join the Cluster, there's really only a couple steps that we need to do. We need to initialize the network devices, so we need to give them IP addresses and what they need to sync up with. So that's the first network connection here. This would be the second network connection. And that's pretty much it. We give it a host name. And then once we hit enter here, it's going to update these networking settings. And it's actually going to go out and reach for an update to see what might be available from the Object First server to make sure it is up to date as far as the software itself. It does take a minute, so I do have a second screen up here to get us past that step. And lastly, once it does check for the update, the update is going to ask for the management IP for the existing cluster. You're also going to put in the password for the Object First user, and that would be it. I'm not going to do that in our lab, so we don't break anything here today. But that is setting up a cluster with a second node that you would bring into the environment. So again, pretty simple. And I think, Brent, you could probably attest to the simplicity of setting up a Object First cluster.
Yeah, when we first started to set it up, we were pretty amazed. The longest time by far was racking the unit, and that was just, we had a rack without any numbers on it, so we were counting holes, and awesome. that was most of the time for everything.
Yeah, so I mean, again, that's what we want to keep, time down to get Veeam running jobs to Object First. So once actually everything's set up, you would log into a web interface, and that's what we see here. get some basic information, what's happening with the environment. You can see what we're looking at here is a single node cluster. Again, that cluster does get set up from the beginning just to make the expansion easier down the road when a second, third, or maybe even a fourth node needs to be added in. But we can see the total of 14 disks, the 2 different networks, and the S3 buckets that we have available. But simplicity is really, again, what we're striving for. And there's really 2 things that have to be done within this web interface in order for backups to be able to be sent from Veeam into Object First. So if you're familiar with object storage, one would be the S3 keys. We do have a few keys out here, but it's just as simple as creating a new key. And so once we have that created, it's going to go ahead and do the access key ID along with that secret access key that we're able to grab directly from here for the access key. We would close out. We would then jump in, show details, add a little extra layer of security just to make sure if this was left up on a monitor or on your desktop, someone could just walk by and grab these credentials from within. But we do have the copy feature here just to make it easier so you don't mistype these long strings of digits. And then the second piece would be creating the buckets. And so we have quite a few buckets out here that we have available. But if we actually create a bucket, the one thing I just really want to point out here is we do need to keep in mind the nomenclature of how things need to be named based on the S3 API. But you can see we have all green check marks there. But the important piece here is that checkbox. So for that immutability, right out of the box, we do it by default. We enable that checkbox, makes it a lot easier just to get it created. And that's all that would need to be done within the web UI of Object First. So not only for that 15 minutes of rack and stacking, but this would be included within that as well for the setup. And you can see this is probably the least amount of time between the text user interface and this web UI compared to rack and stacking, like Brent said.
Yeah, and you know, Ryan, if I may, while you're transitioning to the next thing, one of the things that I always find amazing, and Brent, I'm sure you could probably attest to this too, when you look at this versus other storage solutions that you would set up, about now is when you would have to say, well, what type of RAID set are we going to run? You know, what type of stripe size are we going to set up? So there's all these settings that you would then have to then and go do if you're talking something like, you know, a NAS or a JBOD or some other type of backup repository targets. And you know, what's really nice about this is it's RAID 6 out of the box. It's pre-configured. There's a hardened Linux OS. Brent, you talked about this earlier, that's running on board. No command line access to it. So it's literally hardened out of the box. So when you look at, you know, immutable and just safe in general, you know, that's one of the steps you don't have to worry with Object First because it's already pre-configured with best practices for you.
Yeah, and it's pre-configured for a specific purpose, which is one of the biggest things. That's where so many of these different solutions become more complex. Is they're made to do like everything under the sun, and they might also be able to do object storage. And then when you get into the configuration, you've got to like basically find a cookbook on their website or something to try to figure out for what I'm doing. How do I need to set this up? What block size? What RAID set? What, you know, how many nodes do I need in some of these scale out type solutions? And how do I need to provision that? And how do I set the NICs up? And this just, it's done. There really wasn't any steps skipped during this. This wasn't a, here's one we prepared earlier per se. If we had just wanted to wait the 3 or 4 minutes, we would have literally already been here.
Yeah, and I think coming back on it being purpose-built for backups and specifically Veeam, you know, the RAID 6 on the hardware level itself with the spinning disk that you can see here, plus the NVMe cache that allows for, you know, the fast writes right into the box, is that, again, focusing on backup, there's not all sorts of other things that we're trying to do. We don't have to have, you know, multi-node, you know, for a lot of that redundancy because we're focused on one thing, and with best practices of Veeam already, 3-2-1-1-0, probably already following that, you have copies of your backups that you're able to retrieve. So it does allow us to keep things simple in regards to Veeam and keep the job defaults, like 1 megabyte block size. No issues with writing that into an Object First cluster. Now, another thing to mention with updates and looking at that underlying secure Linux OS, as far as all the updates in regards to Object First happen within the web UI, with the cluster update, we'd be able to check for updates. We're up to date here. But not only does this include the Object First software, but also includes everything on the Linux side as well that needs to be patched and up to date. We take care of that for you. That way you're not having to make sure you update every single package, and who knows how many that might be at a single time. Did you forget one? Did you leave one off? Did you forget to, turn, SSH back off once you got done updating? Everything happens here straight from the same update.
Yeah, and people make fun of Windows updates and how there's always Windows updates and they break stuff all the time. If you've ran much Linux, when you run that update command, there's often dozens and dozens on just a base install of Windows that are all going to be coming down and have to run and be updated. There's a lot of updates behind the scenes for this stuff, and this does make it very easy with just the one click to do everything.
Definitely does. So we've talked a lot about the simplicity. And adding this into Veeam and going through the wizard is really like any other backup repository you've probably added in your life. But let's talk a little bit about performance. And in the first place, I really just want to hit on real quick is just the networking. So we have two 10 gig ports in this particular scenario here that are set up. You can see the IP addresses .60 and .61. And one of the ways we're able to achieve the speeds like 1 gigabyte plus per second per node is based on these network connections. Now, what actually gets added in the Veeam is going to be a single namespace, and it's going to be the same management IP here. So 172.16.3.70 is what gets added in as the backup repository. But if we actually take a look at the job statistics, even with that single namespace that we've added in for the S3 management, we actually take a look at the VMs that are actually being backed up in this particular job, we can see that the first one is actually communicating via .60, the first NIC. If we take a look at the second one, this may actually be the same as well, .60. And now we have a .60, so the next three should be .61 in regards to the load balancing. So this is all built in to the Object First software that will load balance across the different NICs to achieve and sustain the speeds that we're looking for. And this would even go across, say, 4 nodes. If you think about that, that's 2 physical connections per node. So that was 8 streams of data at once that can be load balanced and sent where they are. And that's, again, all built and based off the API that Veeam has designed for smart object storage to really help assist with that.
And that's one of the things Veeam hit on real hard at VeeamON about Veeam 12 is they're focusing very hard on per VM performance. And jobs are being broken out into per VM backup chains for performance, for recovery. And the fact that this load balance is at that per VM level, essentially, with regards to these backups, means that you can really leverage all the performance of your network without having to do things like LACPs on the switches and other potentially complicated network configurations. It just works because it's load balancing from the Veeam side at those VM levels. So you're really leveraging everything without a lot of config and work.
Yep, appreciate it, Brent.
Yep.
And so, lastly, just with the performance here, talk about the speeds, right? We can see here in the statistics, 1 gigabyte per second speeds. This is a single node. Again, we typically see a little bit over 1 gig. We've even seen in our lab up to about 2 gigabyte per second sometimes. Again, a lot of environmental issues do impact that. However, again, up to a full 4-node cluster would achieve right around 4+ gigabyte per second speeds with that backup job. But truly, that's not the most important thing, as we've kind of discussed. It's about that recovery and that ability to test backups and make sure that you can actually recover in a couple different scenarios and then really play off of each other's instant VM recovery and our Sure Backup or the Data Labs technology from Veeam. But you can see that we actually have an on-demand sandbox running here currently. This is running with a Veeam 1 server and a domain controller. So this gives that ability to jump in and test maybe a Windows update or test some patches, test an upgrade before we actually do it on the production VM. And this would be same and very similar to just running a VM in production as a instant VM recovery. But this isn't an isolated environment that gets set up within Veeam. And as Matt mentioned, as we said on the Veeam side and talked a lot about these features, this is, I'd say, one of the most undervalued features and not used that I think is very important. And I think it does come back to what Brent mentioned is, some of the devices to run this just could not handle this type of I/O. And you can see running it here, on-demand sandbox. Obviously, we could do an entire, test of the VM set overnight. That's including the virus scan. But you can see as we click on some of the virtual machines, right, we get the status, we get the heartbeat, the ping, everything that's actually happened within the process of this sure backup job that's now running as an on-demand sandbox. And then lastly, the last piece to really talk about Object First and what it brings, that easy immutability. Very simply, if we needed to actually remove a VM, from backup, we go to delete from disk. Everyone's probably seen this before. If you've used object storage, and especially looking at the public cloud, maybe you have tried to delete something, maybe you have tried to test it, and it doesn't look like I'll be able to do it from there. Let's try another one here. That was a oversight my my thoughts there, trying to do one that's running in that virtual lab. But we should get about 18 seconds in, and it should actually give us the message that it's unable to delete because it is set up for immutable until, I believe it's going to say December 29th. Might even say the 30th. Going to give it a few more seconds. We should see that here. Even with a application like an S3 Explorer that allows you to browse that file system of the object storage, a lot of those don't actually have the tie-in to say that something's immutable, they can't delete it. You would just see the green wheel just spin, 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 trying to work. And if you wanted to watch it for that immutability link, that'd be probably worse than watching paint dry. But we don't want to do that, right? So you'd be able to cancel. But in this case, it does give us, because of that immutability flag, that December 29th is the date that this could actually be removed from the repository.
And that's also assuming you're not doing more backups at that point.
Correct.
So
exactly.
That's one of the things people don't think about, is if you're continually doing backups, you're continually moving that back because it's a backup chain that's, forever full forward. So, that's a moving target. So it's not like, oh, the hacker just has to wait till the 29th, then they can delete everything. It's going to keep moving that forward. And the old ones will roll off based on your retention policies in Veeam and everything. But, it's going to keep that moving forward.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And that's really the last thing I wanted to show there, and just in regards to the lab, just really focusing on that simplicity with the setup, showing the powerfulness of the backup speeds, but also running sure backup, running instant recovery, and then ending with that immutability of not being able to remove the restore points.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when you look at better data management too, that comprises a whole list of things that you really want to focus on when you're trying to ensure that not only can you recover, you're meeting your recovery point objectives, you're basically meeting your company's SLAs, but you're not sacrificing any protection. And, when you look at immutability, I would argue a lot of people probably don't have a full understanding of even what that word truly means. But basically what we're talking about is ensuring that not only could a malicious threat not delete the data, but also the backup administrator is not able to delete the data. That's the whole point, because it's got to be immutable from A to Z, whether it's ransomware encrypting the data or an insider threat. And, we've all seen malicious attacks from an insider where a disgruntled employee on their way out just goes and deletes all the data, production and backup data. So to me, that's just as equal a threat as ransomware.
Sure.
I know. Did we lose Matt there?
Yeah, so to to add on to what Matt was pointing out, the immutable conversation is something that we have a lot with people, where they're like, okay, so it can't be deleted. Well, what about ransomware? It's like, no, it can't be deleted or modified. The immutable means completely unable to be changed, not just that you can't delete it. It means you can't delete it, you can't change it, you can't do anything to it. It is read only. It's like an old optical jukebox, essentially, with a time frame on it, where once it gets to that period, then something can happen. But again, with the way Veeam stores data, that period is constantly moving forward as the backup chain keeps updating with new backup things. So
For sure.
essentially, and you're protected from basically everything, aside from that disgruntled employee taking a hammer into the data center and going to town on everything.
Right. Yeah, and even even physical access to the box. I mean, there's nothing that can be done about that, and I don't think anybody that offers immutability has anything against that. With the
3, 2,
physical
1.
access to the box. Exactly.
Gotta have something off site still. So
I think we're waiting on Matt to jump back in to get a message. His internet died, but we'll see what happens here in a second. Um, so yeah, I mean, really, I mean, in regards to, I mean, your experience just from the unboxing to racking, you've talked about that being simple. Is there anything else that's kind of stuck out with your experience with the beta?
I mean, the biggest thing has just been the simplicity of everything. We've been looking for an on-premise way of guaranteeing backups for years, and we've talked to going back to tape for people, rotating hard drives for really small customers and different things like that, and it's all just so labor intensive. So when they don't have a good internet connection, they're pretty much stuck with something that's massively labor intensive. And then this provides them a way of doing it. This comes along a lot with like manufacturing companies. They build those in the middle of nowhere, but they have massively important data and downtime is not acceptable to them. So they're also massive buildings. They can put backups on the other side of the building, have something where it's immutable, and be able to actually get booted off that data quickly, as opposed to having to put a tape in, put the data back onto spinny disks, or plug in a USB hard drive and wait forever for everything to happen off a single spindle. So it really provides that great performance setup and everything on-prem in an easy to manage solution.
I see what you did there with the bad internet connection, Brent. So I did that on purpose so y'all could talk about, well, what if the backups were going to a cloud-based object storage repository and the connection drops? No,
Right.
it's never good when you look outside, you see the AT&T truck. So you never know. So anyways, hopefully you guys elaborated a bit on my thought, but essentially that insider threat is something to keep in mind. And that's one of the things that we provide, protection against as well. Just final thoughts from me, and then I guess we can wrap this up. I feel like the performance without immutability or immutability without performance, those things have to work together when you talk about a Veeam solution. If you were talking about a legacy data protection product, okay, it's probably not that big of a deal, but we know Veeam is the innovator in this space, and we've harped on it. We've talked on it the whole time. They continue to build ways to leverage that data. So without the performance pillar, but while making sure that data is fully protected from all threats and all disasters, whether it's ransomware, insider threats, also, you've got Veeam replication, which can help you from a natural disaster threat. So all of that has to be accounted for when you look at a better data management solution. And I feel like the Veeam data management layer powered by the Object First storage layer truly is, the best partnership with Veeam. So that's my thoughts. I mean, what are your thoughts, Ryan, before we pitch it to Brent to close us out?
No, exactly. I mean, it's bringing everything in together and designing something that has already been a changer in the marketplace, and now also being, something that differentiated in the marketplace, but leveraging everything that they have in place in order to give the performance that customers are looking for, and the security and that sense of security, knowing that everything is immutable and safe for as long as they really need it to.
Yeah, and from your perspective, Brent, just close us out with some of your final thoughts, and we'll wrap up today's session.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's terrified right now of ransomware, and everybody's calling it ransomware, but it's more and more becoming the intelligent threat actor. There's companies in other countries where you can literally hire consultants to hack companies. And we recently had someone who came to us, and they had been got good. They didn't have an immutable form of their backups. They had 321. They had multiple copies. They had a DR site. They had everything. They were still able to get in and find every different form of backup and actively delete them. And one of the first things that actually triggered people is something was going wrong when backup jobs started failing. Well, they started failing because everything was encrypted everywhere. Right. So everyone's afraid of this. When we talk to executive levels, one of the first things is We don't want to be the next company in the news. We don't want to be the next 7-figure sum paid to recover hospital chain type thing. We need something. And this provides that performance and immutability that people are looking for without adding the management overhead of building something themselves, of these overly complicated general purpose systems that can also do some immutable stuff. This provides a true performance solution for it. And it's the first one, as far as I'm aware, that's going to be compatible with V12 and the new APIs that make Object truly perform quickly and as a first-class citizen for storage for everything. So
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's a lot that we could dig into. We could probably finish chatting about this the rest of the afternoon about why it's important to not only follow the 32110, but you've got to make sure one of them is immutable, at least one, if not all of them. So I feel like that number's about to grow, 321110, right? You got to make sure that they're immutable. With that said, I just want to thank you again, Brent, for coming on and sharing some of your wisdom with us. Really do appreciate it. Sorry about the internet blip. It never fails. I looked outside on the camera and saw AT&T in the driveway. So I'm like, yep, go figure, right? So it happens. But anyways, thank you guys so much for joining us. Also, if you're not following the LinkedIn channel, make sure that you follow us, because we are going to be doing a launch event very early in 2023, towards the end of January, most likely. So be on the lookout for that. We're going to get that scheduled and shared. So we would definitely love for you to be with us on that launch event when we go GA officially. But with that said, gents, thanks for joining us. Really do appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.